Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying BasilCon so far. Now for something completely different. My name is Sophia Vargas. I'm in our open source programs office at Google, and I'm here to talk about measuring open source project health inside and outside of Google. I do this as part of my job as a program manager and research analyst within our OSPO, but then I also get to work with projects outside of Google via the CHAOSS community where I'm an active member. I'll be hanging out for some time after this, so please come find me with questions. So if you're here today, you probably realize that we as Google and Alphabet have quite a long history working in and within open source communities, starting as early as 2000 with some of our first contributions to the Linux kernel and to the Python community. And over the years, we've been releasing projects like Go, Kubernetes, TensorFlow, Android, Chromium, and many others, from the Angular projects to the Bazel community to the Fuchsia project. And there are actually over 2,000 of them that are still active and actively engaged within our extended community. We also work with a number of other projects and various other foundations, as well as an active member in things like the Apache Foundation, the Open Source Security Foundation, where we work on new security toolings and frameworks, and mostly just to give you a sense of how broad our engagement is, from not just working with and within our own projects, but working in the extended community and foundations, as well as working with tooling like the Open Source Fuzzing Initiative to find bugs and vulnerabilities in popular projects, or the recently announced Open Source Insights tool deps.dev, which is a fun way to map out all of the dependencies in your packages. From my perspective as an analyst within OSPO, I get to think about open source health from a number of levels. Here I'm thinking about it at the broadest macro level across all of Alphabet. How do we think about health? And from the perspective of OSPO, in our role to enable Googlers and Alphabet individuals to work and engage in these spaces, we love to see more and more people going out and contributing to open source. So this is something that we actively track. Where we can, this is also limited source of data only coming from GitHub and Git.org, our internal Git service. There are many other platforms that open source activity happens, as well as many other ways to contribute to open source beyond working in version control systems. For a sense of scale, this represents about 10% of Alphabet employees. And for the footprint in our GitHub communities, over 70,000 repositories with active engagement in 2021. Now that's at a really high level. I also get to work with individual project teams that are thinking about measuring health inside of their companies, inside of Google, outside of Google, in various different communities. And I like to start with the question of why are you doing this? What is your goal? What does health mean to you and your project and your community? And if you're talking to stakeholders inside your company or inside your community, health can mean very different things to very different people, whether or not you're a brand new project that's just trying to grow awareness and contributors or grow your community, or maybe you're an established project that's thinking about measuring ongoing productivity and sustained activity within your contributor base. So it starts first with understanding what health means to you and your stakeholders. You might end up with a really long list, so it's always a good thing to prioritize what you're trying to achieve in the short term and what does achievement or success look like for you. Is it adding 10 more contributors, or maybe you build out your documentation set? Once you have this in place, always review what you want to share with your stakeholders. Depending on who you're sharing this data with, you might share it in different ways, or provide different context, or provide different baselines. Showing numbers to people may or may not make sense to them unless it's been tailored for them. In my work, I think a lot about sources and data sources and finding where your activity is happening within your project. In terms of where's your community active, from various versioning control platforms to discussion groups and mailing lists. There are many places that open source activity happens that is traceable. I noticed I didn't put things out here that are, say, non-traceable, say Zoom participation or meetups can be harder to do if it's in person, if it's on platforms that you can't necessarily track attendance. And then thinking about your project footprint. And here's where it can get seemingly straightforward and not be straightforward. Say if you're looking at a project and you're saying, okay, these are all the repositories under that project. Now, depending on how you're defining health or what you're trying to do, maybe you're thinking about a dependent project and you want to ensure the health of that dependency as part of the health of your project. Or maybe you're thinking about something entirely different, how your footprint looks regarding your company's contributors and how your footprint is inside your organization and all the various people that are coming in and out of that. From a practical standpoint, you have to build this pipeline on some kind of infrastructure with some kind of tooling. And all of that comes with a fair amount of regulatory privacy and policies, maybe not the most exciting component of this, but recognize that when you do collect data around these communities, it includes a lot of PII, names, locations, companies, email addresses. It's public, but you're amassing it. And so building that kind of data set does require care and observation to existing regulatory compliance and policy. In terms of specific project areas that I've seen be quite popular working with internal and external communities, clearly growth mindset. Growth is first and foremost for many communities, commits over time, activities over time, contributors over time. For contributor growth, I've seen a lot of focus on retention or growing new contributors, maybe user to contributor conversion rates. Maybe some of you in this room might fall into that statistic. Within a company like Google, I think a lot about understanding our contributor experience inside and outside of Google. If we're trying to incur more diversity in our contribution base, we have to know where we're starting. Also understanding what % of the work is done by what number of people. Usually that 10 to 12 number, depending on the size of the community, is often responsible for 30 to 60% of all the commits in the project. So a better understanding that grouping can help you understand the core of your community as well as who you're most dependent on within that community. For contributor experience, my personal favorites are responsivity. How quickly are we responding to pull requests, issues, PRs, and time to close those things? This came up in an earlier conversation today where this is something that we're actively aware for Googlers and non-Googler experiences in some projects where we've been looking at time to address a pull request from someone who's a known contributor or a known person inside that company versus someone who isn't part of that organization or who isn't known. And this is something that I've seen implemented by other projects as a way to gauge areas where we might need to improve our documentation, our education, our mentorship, especially outside of our own organization where we have less visibility and less direct support. Popular other quality measures can be bug fixes, issues, how quickly those things are resolved, how many are popping up after a release, and how quickly they're closed and implemented. As an analyst, I have to state these things because these are some of my own personal pet peeves when they're not discussed and people show data. There's always, if you see a number, what does it mean? Without context, it doesn't mean anything. So popular question is, okay, if you told me that you have 5 people this month, is that normal? What does it look like last month? What does it look like last month, last year? Is this growth? Is this decline? How is this changing? Time frames. As working within a company that has a public reporting schedule, quarters and yearly reporting seems like a pretty popular cadence, but often doesn't make a lot of sense within a project and a project cadence. We found that release over release can be a much more comprehensive and context-driven comparison for time changes, say retention of contributors release over release versus year over year. Account for and filter out bots and automation. I used to look at a lot of human-driven activities on GitHub and realized that I was having harder time separating out script-based activities versus people's time spent on keyboards and had a harder time making that assumption. Also, one of my favorite examples, Tony, if you're still in the room, I'm going to talk about your project here. I see you over there. He was working on a project to look at downloads over time for Bazel to better understand the versions that were still most popular and used to better set priorities in the community. And when he shared the data with me, it looked like a sine wave instead of anything bumpy or spiky. And the two of us together thinking about it and saying, okay, this has to be some kind of CI/CD system that's causing this repetitive nature. So instead of seeing maybe growth over time, we were seeing a regular behavior by machine, not necessarily by people. So it's harder to understand what you're looking at in some of these statistics. And anytime you share data, please always share your queries, your sources, your bases. If you share a metric with me and it's 2 people versus 200 people, I'm going to interpret these numbers differently. So just be very open and transparent. A good rule of thumb here is, can someone else recreate this value by how you've described it or how you've sourced it? If they cannot, then there's no way to verify this or repeat it next year when this exercise comes around again. And if you're just starting this and you're thinking about metrics and measurement in your company, in your sub-project, in your another project that's not Bazel, and you just don't know where to start, there is an external community called the Chaos Project that thinks about metrics and methodologies and develops software for aggregation of these things. So it's a great way to just kind of browse and see what other people are interested in, how metrics are defined in various different places. Thank you.